tutorials. I just made one for her. Okay, so here's Illustrator. What you may want to do is, if yours looks different than mine, let's go ahead and reset them all to look the same. So mine's on Essentials. That's probably the one that you'll want to go through. Actually, let me just hide all that stuff. Well, I suppose I should open up. Let's see. I'm going to restart Illustrator just so you can see what happens when you first open it up. Alright, so launching Illustrator. I'm not sure how often they change these images, but in case you guys were curious where they're pulling these from, they're from from Adobe. They have Behance. I think that's where most of them are coming from. You guys can have Behance portfolios, by the way. You don't have to be professional to have one. And then this window will come up. Sometimes you might want to pay attention to what it's saying. Usually, if they've got some new sort of information, they'll put it here. Sometimes they're worth watching sometimes. So what we want to do is do File New. They do have some templates. We're not going to bother with those for now. So for now, just go to File New. And you can name it right away if you'd like to. If you want to just call it Logo, that's fine. Right here is a number of artboards. You are welcome to up this number now, but we don't need to yet because we can add them later. But it's basically, again, the closest approximation to it is a number of pages. But they're more just like areas to work in, would probably be a better way to say it. Because you never want to do multiple page documents in Illustrator. That's not what it's for. That's what InDesign's for. But it's good places to have a lot of different variations of something you're working on. You're like, yeah, I kind of like it. What happens if I change this color? You just, rather than making a new file, just make a new artboard, and it copies your contents onto a new page-like area. For the size, for now, you guys can do whatever you want. You can also make your custom sizes. I might just go ahead and do like an 8x8. As you can see, mine is in inches. Yours might be coming up in something else because of how your Illustrator is set up, and I'll show you really briefly how to manage that over in Preferences. You can also start off right here. So you might have it in points, you might have it in picas, most of the time you'll probably have it in pixels or inches, whatever's most relevant to the output of your project. Bleed, this is something referring for printing, and we'll get into this a little bit more as time goes on. We have to consider it more for the book, but for now just know that the bleed is only if you're going to be printing, okay? Any printer, you guys know, your own printers at home, you can't print to the edge of the page, right? Won't let you do it. It would wreck the printer if it did that. And so what happens is you always have extra on the outside area. So if there's color, usually they call it a color bleed, it might be a photograph that goes to the edge of your printed matter. You don't actually just give them a file with the edge there. You actually have to give a printer a file with excess color or excess photo on the edge. Usually it equals about 1/4 inch extra for the whole area, and then they print it on a bigger sheet of paper and then they trim it. So a bleed is necessary if you're going to have any kind of thing that has a color or image spilling past or right up to the edge. Under Advanced, I'm just going to keep it at CMYK. That's fine. You could switch it to RGB if you wanted to. If you know for real that you're not going to use it for anything other than screens, you can just do RGB. If you're going to use CMYK because you are going to do some printing at some point with it, the color discrepancy occasionally will happen. Usually really, really vibrant colors will dull down if you switch it to CMYK, but you can also go back and forth. Raster effects is a little bit tricky. So you guys remember that in Photoshop everything is pixel-based, right? We have to tell that file when we make it how many dots per inch or pixels per inch do we want it set up as. Illustrator doesn't think that way. Illustrator is vector-based. However, to make it more annoying, anything that's a really complicated effect is actually, it thinks of it in pixels. So basically what this is saying is, when I need to think in pixels, how complicated do you want this? So I always say just put it as high as possible. It'll look better on screen anyway. You might not need this in your particular file, but it's just saying in case you're doing an effect that needs to think in raster, make sure that this is set at 300, and then you'll have a little bit less hassle later. Preview mode, I think default is fine. And that's about it. So if you guys did want to do a bleed, you basically, The bleed is that extra little space on the top and the sides. Where I'm not going to bother with it this time because we're going to deal with that for InDesign, but just for now you can leave it at 0 if you like. I think that should do it. Alright, so here's my square. And again, I'm going to make sure my window and workspace is set at essentials. You guys can flip through all of these other ones to see what you think. If you ever get kind of lost, you've got too many things open and things have collapsed and opened up, you can just hit reset essentials and everything is back to where you hopefully can find them. There'll be some aspects you don't even need, so feel free to close windows up if they're in your way. You can always just go to window and unclick them if they're present and you don't want to see them anymore. So, so far the lay of the land, it definitely does look a little bit different than Photoshop. Thankfully, much of the menus are listed in the same way. Some of the things are similar under them. The tools are, there's a couple overlaps, but very different overall. So here's our toolbar. I'm going to make just a really simple box over here so we've got some things to move around. So if we shift down, you guys can see here, most of the time it'll come up as a rectangle, but it could pop up as any one of these. It depends on what you used last, which can be annoying if you accidentally were messing around with the tool you're unfamiliar with and then you're trying to locate the other one. Just like Photoshop, remember that anytime you see a tiny arrow in the corner of the tool, that means there's extras underneath. So you've got options that you might not be familiar with that could prevent you from finding the thing you're actually looking for. So, but let's start with, sorry about that, my sister is contacting me. Yeah, so let's start with just a simple shape. So just like Photoshop though, you can use your shift key and you'll get the perfect circles off of an ellipse or a perfect square off the rectangles. But there's also something you can do here where if you click once out in the space or just on the surface of the page, you can dictate right here what you would like that size to be. So if I just, I'll just do like a 2x2, boom, done. A little bit faster. But you can also click on that tool and just drag and drop to wherever you need it to be. Mine has, and I think it's on every version, I can't remember for sure. You can see the width and the height pops up in that corner so you can kind of see what size you're working with. That's why if you have a really specific size in mind, it's better to just click the once, get that dialog box open, and you can just type in whatever you need. But if you're trying to just arrange shapes according to other things you're doing, then you probably don't care too much, and they're very easy to modify once you have something in here. Now, while it's building, I'm going to go ahead and color a couple of these ones so they're easier to see on screen. There's these swatches that are available to you at any time. Oh, didn't want to select that one. Okay. There we go. So the Move tool in Photoshop is very similar to the Move tool here, except it's selecting a full path, which is all these connected dots. Now I'm going to open up the layers because I think it's important that you are understanding, because right now you have no idea what it's doing. It's just building layers and it's kind of minding its own business. And you don't, if you're doing something really simple, technically you don't even have to pay attention to the layers right away. But it is creating sub-layers for you. So you can manually add a new layer. You're very welcome to do that, but it automatically assumes if you don't choose to do a new layer that it's just going to put everything on sub-layers. These sub-layers can be modified and moved around, just like the layers in Photoshop. So for example, if I decide that I want that pink one on top of the blue one, I just shift their layer order. So every time you do anything, it adds a sub-layer. Sometimes these can get crazy long. You have to have the layers. You don't merge them the way you do in Photoshop. But that's why I often will have multiple layers, because then instead of groups, the way that they show them in Photoshop, you just have lots of layers with sub-layers. I'll just keep that open so you can kind of see what's happening as I build things. All right, so I'm going to zoom in here, because here's where the distinction between Photoshop and Illustrator becomes very apparent. I'm going to make fatter strokes on these so you can see what's happening also. All right, so can you guys see that blue line? Just barely. Sometimes it's not a blue line. You can actually tell your layer to do different colors for their, if you double click on it, like it'll turn green. Sometimes depending on what you're working with, if you're trying to do like a green stroke and your layer is also set to be green, it's difficult to see the line. Does that make sense? So if you're ever running into that issue, you can change, you just double click on it and you can change the color of your layer. Hopefully this is a little easier to see anyway. So this tool, as you know, if you make something, you can click on the object and move it around. Okay, so that's really important. However, this is where you can see, when I zoom in far enough, this is what it's made of. This is how you make a shape in Illustrator, is with points. So this object has multiple points. If I want to manipulate a point and therefore modify my object, I actually have to go to the direct selection tool, which is the white one. And then I can actually choose an individual point. So it's hard to see, but this became white, 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 and this got colored green. And that means this is selected. Once it's selected, I can do whatever I want with it. So if you are trying to follow along, see if you can get that to happen. Now, points, you can add a lot more. There's a couple of different ways that you can select them. You can see with this particular tool, all I have to do is actually select the point. Now, if you don't yet have it selected, and if you know where the point probably is, you can also go directly to the area and it will highlight it for you, and you can click on it there. Otherwise, you can select it first with the normal selection tool, and then switch tools and then actually click on it. So if you have a really complicated shape, you'll likely want to select the object first so you can see where all the points are, and then you can choose them. So there's a couple ways that you can go about doing that. The Magic Wand tool is back over here, but its job is to select the objects. It's kind of similar in the same way as Photoshop does. I don't usually use it. I don't honestly see a reason for it. I don't use this tool because there's two other ways that I think work much better. If I want to select something, I just use that tool. Or if I want to select a grouping, let's say I want this one and this one, while I could use this tool and hit the Shift key at the same time and manage to select them, I'll just do that real quick. So if I wanted this point plus this one, I'm holding the Shift key down, and then I can move them in unison. But I can also grab whatever I want with the lasso tool, and I think I just grabbed something from the other one as well. We'll see. Yep, I did. So I selected a little bit extra more than the blue. Now, if this is happening to you and you don't like it to happen to you over in your layers, you can actually lock that layer, and that way I won't accidentally select anything from it if I don't want to. So if you had a lot of complicated shapes, this is a way to select multiples at a time. Usually I only use this one for more organic things, but you could always use this one as well. Alright, so here's a shape that I pre-made and then modified. Here comes the pen tool. This one will have to become your friend whether you want it to become your friend or not. The pen tool can be a beast when you're first starting off, I'm not going to lie. Now, if you're just doing a really simple shape, like a polygon of some sort, that's not hard. You just click, 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 and then when you are ready to finish your shape, this is really important, you must always return back to your point of origin, that first click you made, to finish your shape. I'm going to show you why this is important. Now, if I don't have a stroke set, it seems less important, because it'll be like, oh, well, sure, there we go, there's my shape. It seems done, because it's filled, but it's not actually done. Because if I stop there, if I switch my tool, I'm like, yay, there it is. And then later on, I want to add a stroke to that. No stroke on that side, because it is not a complete shape. So now occasionally, if you're in the middle of something and you forget, it's not that big of a deal. If you realize, like, oh, shoot, that's supposed to have one, you can actually click back on it at one point and click back to your original point, and it'll connect it. You're not stuck if you forget. You just got to go back and reconnect those little shapes there. So if you want to reconnect it, you just, again, click on your pen tool, click on that, and click on the other one. It doesn't really matter which order. It doesn't remember which one you did last. It just knows that there's a gap. And then you have a complete shape. Most everything in Illustrator, you have to have a complete shape. Points have to connect to points. Otherwise, things will just not behave correctly. Now, in addition to just the normal pen tool where you can start building things, there are 3 other ones under here that are really important. And this you can use on either a shape that you pre-made with the shape tool or something that you built by hand. It's the add points and then delete anchor points. So the add points, you can also just hit the plus key on your screen or on your keyboard, and you decide where you want some added. So if I wanted some point to stick out here, I'd have to make sure first that I have these points that prohibit it from raising the whole thing. And then I can click this third one I just did and allow it to jut out. So you have to practice a little bit with it. You have to kind of remember how many points you need to something. It's very easy to take away and it's very easy to add. So if I want like another one through here, I can just click back to this tool, add another one, and again like bump it out. If at any point I realize I don't need one, then you go to the delete anchor point tool and you just click on the point itself and you can get rid of them. Now what happens if you want curves? This one is where you have to pay really close attention. It's bound to follow you up every time if you are new to Illustrator. It will frustrate you. So I'm going to make a circle just so you can kind of see how circles generally built. I'm holding the shift key to make mine. So you can see it's got a point, the curve points to another point, and so on. If I wanted to create something even slightly similar to that, it's not easy. Always use a circle tool if you can. What you would do is click, and then the next time you click, you can't let go right away. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky. So I'm going to click, but I do not let go of my mouse or trackpad. And then I pull away from my dot, and I start to create a curve. This is the pen tool. And then Illustrator is trying to be kind to you. Okay, so when you let go of this and you intend to make your next curve, can you guys see what it's doing? It's trying to figure it out for you. You're like, oh, I think I know what you want to do. Sometimes it thinks it's helpful. And it is, and sometimes it's just like, heck no, that is not what I wanted. The problem here is that it's still going to help you. You will have to go back, like for example, if I start with the curve and I actually want a straight edge from here, it's going to make a curve for me and there's nothing I can do about it. So you just go ahead and drop your next one. You're going to go back and modify that. And if I want to, like, so now though, after my second drop, if I want to make a straight line, it'll let me. And if I want to go back to this one and add another curve, again, I do not let go right away. I simply pull out the other anchor point and make a curve. So these ones take some time. Now, so for example, when I said I want this a straight line and it's like, nope, giving you a curve, now you got to go modify that anchor point. To modify an anchor point that doesn't already have a curve attached to it because you didn't make one, you go to the anchor point tool. And then on this, you can pull and anchor. So if I wanted a better curve on this one, I could simply pull out and make one. If I wanted to take one away, I would click on this and actually it will take it away. But this is the bane of a lot of people's existence in Illustrator. Yes, Molly. Right, that's where this is a very, very annoying process. So here's where the tricky part is. So I'll just go back one step. So okay, so you know I pulled a curve on this one, right? And so when I told it to make a new anchor point on this one, it immediately, you can see what it's doing, it's clicking it back. So here's the tricky thing. If you have do have an anchor point pulled, you do not use this tool, which seems very counterintuitive. Because this is the anchor point tool. You should be able to click on it and it should be able to manipulate it. But this one is only around if you don't already have a curve. So like down here, on this one, I didn't have a curve technically. The curve on this one is being created by this curve. It's not being created by this point. So if I click on this one, you can see that I get, you know, those two little guys and they're sticking out. They always work in tandem though. So if I did want a curve on this one, but not on this one, I have to go back in and modify it. So here's why the modification of an existing anchor point happens. You actually have to switch to the direct selection tool. So once you make a curve and you need to modify the curve, you no longer use the convert anchor point tool. You click on the direct selection tool and then you can modify. If you click on these, you can see it shows you where the anchors have been pulled, and then you can go in and select it and do some modifications as you need them. So for example, if I wanted this one back to being straight edge, I would push both back into their origin point, and then I can get that. So that way I can get away with having a line, a straight line, and a curve. If you're just doing curve, 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 it's not as big of a deal, but it's frustrating, I'm not going to lie. So, I mean, I definitely, depending on the purpose, of course, you can add them, but in this case, it wouldn't do much good. Unless I put my anchor point like right after that point, that's possible. I could. If you're trying to like, there are times in which I could have simply put one like right here, like an extra anchor point, and then it might have been able to modify it without me changing much. But it's better not to have points you don't need. You always try to slim down the number of points you have, always for illustrators. Like, how can I make my complicated shape with as few points as possible? Because when it comes time to make curves, extra points hurt curves. So for example, in this shape here, I don't actually need this one at the top. If I want this curve to happen here, I don't actually need him. If I take him away, I can actually create a curve just with this one. Now this is a little bit lopsided, but you get the idea. Sometimes you just want to take away as many points as possible. So when you guys start to create your shapes, you will have some headaches. And my suggestion as you're playing around is to try to do shapes that are, just for practice, just shapes that are half geometric and half curved, and see if you can manipulate them the way that you want to, because that will be a really good practice. Without that practice, when you arise in a situation for real that you need it to work, it will be a little bit frustrating. So I'm going to do a one just again just to review. So I'm going to switch back to the pen tool. And then on part of this, I'm going to make it curved. Let me come back down here and finish it off. So if I wanted to add a curve to any of these points that don't have one yet, which right here, this is the vertices that doesn't have one, I would go to my Convert Anchor Point tool, click on that point, and pull away to reveal the anchor points. So sometimes they get a little bit tangled. Sometimes you got to open them up a little bit more. And that way I could finish off a curve here. But what happens if I want this straight? I have to switch now, because if I click on this again, it simply takes it away. Okay, because really you can only actually use the Convert Anchor Point tool essentially once. It is the, it's this one right here under the pen tool. Let me move this over a little bit. So under the pen tool, this is probably the one you normally see. It's the fourth one down. Yeah, Nicholas? You could possibly just click on that point and like this. Is this what you mean? Like move? Yeah, that's one way. And then just remember that if you want to modify that curve more than what you originally did with the Convert Anchor Point tool, because you know as soon as you click on it, it's going to go away. That's when, again, you switch back to the Direct Selection tool, and then you can manipulate both of these anchor points however you want to. At that point, they become independent. When you first pull one, they're together, they're in sync, they're in tandem. So when you pull one direction, the other side does the other. It's really difficult to get two different directions or two different kinds of curves happening until you let go of it, and then you can go back and manipulate each of these points on their own. They still like to function in tandem, but they will allow you a little bit more flexibility. So basically, when you're first trying them out, it's not going to be fun. Just remember, if you are clicking away your anchor point tools, you need to move over to the direct selection tool. If you can at least remember that part, your life will be easier. But it does take some practice. As we move past this is one way to make shapes. The other one here that I honestly don't use as much because I have learned extreme control over the many, many years I've used this. This is a curve tool, and it kind of makes some decisions for you. It will never draw a straight line. It always assumes that you're probably wanting to make a curve from point to point. So you're welcome to try this one also. If you're new to Illustrator, you'll probably end up putting more points than you need. Like in this case, I would probably very quickly eliminate quite a few of these ones just because you don't need quite as many to have those curves. You can still go back and modify any of these points that have been created with the curve tool. You just go back over to the delete anchor point tool, for example, or the add or delete. The anchor point tool on this one, since all the anchors have been made into curves, if I click on this one, it goes away. So even if it's been created with that tool, that still will take them away. So you're welcome again. Try the curve tool if you want to. I think it's better to get a better handle on the pen tool itself and try to make the curves happen, but at times it might be easier with the curve tool. But I find I don't get the exact control I need, so it's generally not one I use. And it is a newer tool. If you've used Illustrator in the past, you might be surprised. All right. Next round is text. I'm going to go ahead and stop this here and do it so it's not such a long video.